Welcome to the Career Coffee Chat podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Urban, certified career strategist and executive coach, removing career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, influence, and income. Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Aaron Urban, and today we're going to have a great conversation about having impactful conversations. Now, I know most of you during the day have lots of conversations. You're thinking, what do you mean by an impactful conversation? Well, some conversations matter or have more weight and significance more so than others. Some are just to impart information. However, I would argue to say that even when you're just having those imparting information conversations, there may be an opportunity for you to further yourself in your professional career, particularly for those of you who are seeking career advancement, and I'm not sure who isn't seeking career advancement. This is a great conversation to be a part of about having impactful conversations. I'm having way too much fun with this, clearly. So if you're concerned about elevating your career, we definitely want to have those conversations that matter. So what we'll be talking about today is how to discover key insights around career advancement. And from our guest, Master Certified Coach, Carissa Gay. Today we'll be talking about what's the significance of a conversation in your career? What are we talking about impactful or empowering conversations? What's the ingredients of an effective conversation versus just a regular old conversation? And what are those 3 conversations you should be having to advance your career? So know more about our excellent guest today. Carissa Gay has 20 years of nonprofit, academic, and corporate leadership roles. Her focus has always been on coaching and training high-impact leaders, and she's passionate about helping professionals identify and maximizing their leadership brand while empowering those impactful conversations. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome to the show, Carissa. Carissa, it's great to see you.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, Aaron. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Now we're having fun with this, aren't we?
Maybe a little too much fun. I don't know.
I know, maybe a little bit too much. We'll wear it out. We'll wear it out. So I want to say good morning to Cornisha is just tuning in now from the Woodlands. And as you are hopping on the show, don't be shy. Say hi. Reach out to us and put your comments in there. I'm sure you're curious about what those impactful conversations are and when they matter and the who, what, when, how. And if you're like me, I like a process. So what is that process to have that a meaningful and impactful, empowering, and all the other buzzwords conversation? And of course, Carissa, I'm interested to know what got you into the type of coaching work that you do. Now, you're a master certified coach. So for those of you who don't know, that's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big deal, which means you've been coaching quite some time. But what was that catalyst that either got you into coaching or really propelled you in what you're doing today?
Yeah, the story really began in Mongolia, of all places.
Wow.
How many people can say that they've been in Mongolia, right? It's in the record books as having the world's coldest capital cities. So I definitely learned to dress in layers while I was living in Mongolia, but I did community development, nonprofit work there early in my career. And I remember distinctly being in a room with a bunch of young professionals, and they were trying to figure out where to go with their career, what would make the biggest impact. And it was just a eureka moment for me to realize that every single person has a leadership impact. It doesn't matter whether your title is the CEO or the secretary or the engineer. We're all making an influence in our sphere. And that experience of being in Mongolia really laid the foundation for me of I want to be working with leaders throughout my career. And by leaders, it's people that want to advance and make an impact. And so when I came back stateside, I got a job in an academic setting and discovered this thing called coaching. Because before that, I was much more in roles that were training, telling people information, which has a certain value. But I discovered that coaching goes far deeper because it really helps people create their own vision, trajectory, as well as the resources to be able to get there. So I started cutting my teeth on coaching, and I guess you could say that the rest is history. Began pursuing different certifications in that, but this tug was always there of I want to be impacting leaders. So I experienced what many of us have had at some point in our career. There was a reorg, and my dream job evaporated into thin air, which at the time you just feel like your world has shattered. But as I stepped back and looked at what does this open up for me, I realized this is really the launching pad to fulfill that calling, really, to be
absolutely
leader. So
that's fascinating. Yeah,
that's what brought me into coaching, and it's really all about the conversations.
Carissa, I'm really fascinated of what brought you to Mongolia, but I think that's maybe a conversation for another time, because I was like, interesting. That's really interesting, but that's great. So I love what you're doing and the focus that you have, helping people understand that yes, we're all leaders, and sometimes the hardest person to lead is yourself. And today we're going to be talking about, first of all, what makes an empowering, impactful conversation more poignant than perhaps a standard conversation where you're saying, "Oh, hey, how are you doing? How's the kids?" Or all the impactful conversations. What's your take?
Yeah, that's really an insightful question, because if you step back for a moment and you think about what happens without conversation, and really not that much, because conversation is like the glue that moves things together. I mean, even in an organization that's very, task focused, you still have conversations happening in the production process. And I have some repair people here, so hopefully it's not too loud in the background.
No, you're fine. We can't hear a thing.
Okay, just real life here. We're sharing.
Yeah, it's real life. Yeah,
on
maybe a train or a dog barking. Or
that's right. You never know what's gonna show up. In Mongolia, it was the garbage pickup people that would come with their wagons and stuff. So that was the event, event of the day. But getting back to conversation, in some ways, conversation is the ingredient that enables us to connect with other people, to build collaboration, to move things forward. And if we're not skilled in conversation, if conversation feels like this awkward thing that I must do in order to get to the real work, then it can really be limiting.
Because I'm task oriented. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I'm a list maker. Don't take me away from my lists, but conversations really enable us to actually be more productive and have more influence. I remember this one guy I was working with in the oil and gas industry, and he was a fairly new team leader and very much task focused. And he told me how when he would have meetings with his team, it was like, well, let's get into business and talk about what we need to accomplish. And he said, I don't understand why my team doesn't seem on board, or like we're not really going in the same direction. And as we began unpacking, his discovery was maybe it's my communication or lack thereof that's really impacting the dynamic of the team. And so he made just a couple small changes where he was intentional about touching base or checking in with people on an individual basis. How was your week? Or how's your family doing? And just having that personal connection with people totally changed the dynamic of the team, but even changed his interaction with them as well.
Right. It's very interesting you bring that up, because I think now perhaps it's more obvious that we tend to communicate in sound bites. right? Whether it be via text message or instant message, or it's so well into goal oriented. And just take the past couple of years. We've transitioned fairly successfully ish into a virtual, now somewhat hybrid, maybe in person occasionally environment. But with that digital component, communicating with someone digitally, it seems like it requires more of a focus, right? We have a focus, and it's more transactional. My encouragement to people is to consider conversation not just as a transactional environment. You get from point A to point B. There's a lot of nuances in conversation, and sometimes when we're a little less structured about it, you can actually have a much more fruitful and productive conversation than you realize. And my aha moment was years ago, way before the pandemic, way when I was a much younger professional. I was very task oriented. So similar to your client that you were speaking about, all my conversations were about what's next? What are we doing now? What's our task? Let me check the list, right? Does anybody relate to that? You find yourself maybe relating to this? Yes. I mean, when I want to have a conversation with somebody, it is for a purpose. I'm not having just a random conversation. That just didn't happen for me very naturally. And as a result, how I was perceived by my team and by the organization as a whole was not the brand that I necessarily wanted to portray. When that aha moment happened, like a slap in the face, oh, hey, by the way, you're not who you think you are, to everybody else. Serious self-identity crisis there when I walked through that, and I just made some very minor shifts because everybody asked me, well, Erin, how did you go from being known as the steamroller, that was my nickname, to a leadership role in 9 months? And I said, well, it wasn't like I was giving birth, although it seemed kind of like maybe 9 months, poof, a leadership role. But the transition to get there was actually not a reinvention. I didn't have to change who I was. I did not have to be authentic at all. I actually was allowed myself to relax a little bit and not be so what's next driven. And to have these moments. I've had another guest on a couple of years ago. What was it, a couple of years ago? I don't know when. But she mentioned something called moments that matter. Does that resonate with you, Carissa?
Oh, it very much is in those moments that the connection happens. And from a brain science perspective, I love looking at the neuroscience of conversation as well, that it's not just this touchy-feely stuff, but actually every single conversation has a chemical component to it that the brain is telling you and that other person there's either trust and safety in the conversation or distrust, and I'm not sure if I want to engage. So when we take this intentional approach to our conversation in the moments, as you were saying, we can bring that connection that then actually paves the way for greater collaboration in the business. It's like, I trust this person. They get me. We're on the same page, and we almost dismiss small talk as small. It's wrong. It's wrong.
That's right. I remember myself telling the HR person who told me that I was not perceived as I thought it was. What do you want to do? I'm not going around gossiping with people. I don't have time for that. I'm a project manager. I got to get things done. What's wrong with you people? So yeah. Just seeing that a little bit differently. And for anybody tuning in now or later, if you have a question about how to either get through a sticky conversation that you're having or need to have, or maybe make a conversation be more impactful, feel free to pop it in the comments or reach out to us later if you're watching the replay. I'd love to be able to help you through that. And speaking of sticky conversations, that happens now too. And it seems to be a little bit more often than before the pandemic. And I think it's partially because people's cups, their tolerance, if you will, kind of.
They're maxed.
Yeah, they're maxed out on the tolerance. So people have a lot less bandwidth, right now? And how can we approach these conversations a little bit differently to be not only more empathetic, but have conversations that matter with these individuals and not necessarily tap into their bandwidth too much?
I love that question. It even gets a little bit into the process you were alluding to earlier. There's 3 C's that you can include in every conversation. And the first C is that connection piece that we've been talking about. When you are really hearing the person and acknowledging them, that's what puts them in that psychological safety place where it's not we're coming here to each push our point of view in the conversation, but we're working in a common direction. So finding a way to simply connect, and it could be just a question about, how are things going in your work world. It can even be a simple acknowledgement of, wasn't the game great this weekend? And being able to share an experience like that, or complimenting them on how they're contributing to the team. All of those things acknowledge who they are as a person, and you're taking time to show, I care and I value you in the conversation. And then I'll pause there.
No. That's great information. I mean, it really does matter. Making people feel seen and heard. I think that's where it is. And I know here on Career Coffee Chat Show, that's one of the things that I live by. And I let my guests know right up front, we want to make sure that those people tuning in, like yourself, that you're listening to the show now or watching the show, I want to make you seen and heard. We value you, and want to make sure that you know that you're welcome here and you have an equal seat at this table. So it's helping people understand and creating that environment, whether or not you have the title as a leader, or whatever, manager, whatever, or not. It's creating that safe space for people to feel like they can relax a little bit.
Listening is such a powerful gift that you can offer to people. When people are listened to, it allows them to start seeing situations more creatively and gain perspective that they didn't have before. So that ties in with the second C that you can include in conversations, and that is curiosity. That you approach the conversation with a curiosity about their perspective, rather than we're all so eager. At least I'll raise my hand of, I just want to give them my perspective or tell them what I think, because of course I have good ideas on how to solve this. But when we start first with that curiosity, that's what really creates bridges in the conversation. And one of my favorite questions to ask, I mean, I use it in coaching, but I use it in many contexts, is, what do you see as the real challenge here?
Oh, that's
powerful. And when you ask that question, think about what that does for the other person. It gives them an opportunity to go deep, to step back and say, what is it underneath all of this that is blocking the project, or what's causing this dynamic in the team? And you're asking it in a curious, non-judgmental way. What do you see as the real challenge? And then you're able to have a productive and collaborative conversation around what's behind that, or what might solutions be. And you're giving them the opportunity to share their perspective and come up with ideas for solutions, which leads to the third C, which is collaboration. Right. That you're approaching the conversation from a collaborative perspective of, what do you see as the ideal outcome here? And when you ask it that way, it really invites them to create that pathway towards a successful outcome. And when you think of those sticky conversations, people come in each with their point of view that they're bringing to the table.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask the question, well, what do you see as the ideal outcome? And even you have an opportunity to share what your ideal outcome is.
Mm-hmm.
That really brings in a negotiation principle of then you're able to find what is it that's really important behind all of that. And the trivial things get pushed away with looking at what is it that we really want to accomplish together in this conversation.
Right. So I love where all of this is going. It lines strongly with collaborative leadership. It's more like collaborative conversations. And I feel like we have strayed away from that to a great degree over the last couple of years. We've strayed away from collaborative conversations and leaned more into transactional conversations. Mm-hmm. I have information A to impart. I will impart that information, and that's it. And it's not as productive. And I feel like that's why some organizations say, oh, we just need to go back into the office and this will fix everything. It's not really the case. What will help is for organizations to understand, people to understand how to have conversations, approach conversation differently. Because this type of conversation can happen in the digital space. I have it all the time as a coach. Obviously, coaching is a very collaborative and partnering. It's a partnering process to help people unlock their potential. So you can have that as well. And coming into the dialogue with an understanding that it's not just all about me and what I think and what I have to say, and pushing that agenda onto someone. Something when you mentioned the second C, Carissa, really stuck out to me. And it just popped in my head. And I said, you know what? This would be very useful when you're interfacing with someone with a dissenting point of view. Maybe their worldview is much different than yours. And right now we have a lot of this back and forth going on, these people in different camps. I'm here or I'm there and you're wrong. And a lot of this dissent and divisiveness. And I feel like in order for us to work together as a society and work together in organizations, to have more non-judgmental curiosity with these conversations may be helpful. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. When you were saying that, what came to mind for me is that respect is missing from the dialogue. Everyone is just eager to get their point of view out there, and we've lost that ability to truly listen. And we can say, I respect you, but that's one thing. The true way to show respect is by that listening and that curiosity that you were talking about, that we want to hear and understand from their perspective. And from that place, then productive dialogue can emerge. When it's all transactional, it shuts down collaboration.
It does, yeah. And it's something I learned in coaching and going through my formal ICF coach training, as try not to ask A/B questions like yes, no.
Those tend to be the easiest to ask.
The easiest. However, they may not encourage further engagement. They don't encourage that collaboration. Once you hear the yes or the no, well, that's, you kind of come at a dead stop. Now you have to restart again. How you do, So try not to stay, try to stay away from those as much as possible, and really help engage the person and helping them co-create the outcome, whatever that looks like, particularly if you're trying to come to a decision or trying to create a path forward, whatever that might look like. So would you mind giving us some additional examples of some questions that help people co-create that path? So I really like of what would you like to see this outcome, or how do you envision, the ideal outcome, or what do you see as the real root problem or cause or challenge? I really like those. And it removes some of the definitive languages that I have historically tripped up on, and a lot of also other high achievers, task-driven folks like to use what I call definitive language, which is you will and we should and we are, I think, right? We try to remove that from the conversation in order to be more collaborative. So what are some other questions that we might ask?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another type of question that really unpacks someone's perspective is to listen for the key word of what they're talking about and then ask, how would you define X? So let's say that they're talking about, a successful deployment of the project, and they have a picture in their mind of what it looks like, and you have a picture of what it looks like. So asking them, well, say more about a successful deployment, or how would you describe a successful deployment? And by asking it in such an open-ended way, you're inviting them to create that pathway towards the future, and it starts giving the specifics of it has these elements to it, and this is the timeline, and you've created a very collaborative conversation just by listening, focusing on those key words, and inviting them to tell the story of what that can look like.
That's beautiful, because a lot of times we hear the word successful deployment, for example, or anything. Like my husband was talking about a certain thing. I think we were talking about, well, I'd really like to see this. And so I asked him to describe what that particular thing was to him. Like, when you say this, what do you see? Because I'm pretty sure that what I saw was very different than what he saw, and was right. And that helped me understand where he was coming from. So we weren't working at cross purposes. It happens a lot. We hear a word or a term or a description. We have a picture in our heads. But that doesn't mean it's the same picture someone else has for that same thing. Now, here's another time where it comes into play. Let's say you're interviewing for a new job. Right? And having these really interesting questions to elicit some more information about either expectations about the job, what the team is really like, what do they expect from you in the first 30, 60, 90 days, etc. Help you understand if this is a good fit for me or not. And most importantly, uncover what are those hidden things that aren't in the job description. What would be a powerful question in an interview that you would recommend someone ask?
Yeah. Oh, there's lots of juicy ones there. One I've seen that's really effective is just asking, what are the company's goals for these days? The next 6 months might be long enough. Not even a year out, but just wanting to hear what is the company's vision. And then as you hear the response to that, you're able to share, here's how my strengths would add value and contribute to those particular objectives. In those type of conversations, you're always listening through the lens of how can I connect who I am and my brand to what the company is looking for. So that type of question works beautifully for that.
Yeah. Yeah. The segue off of that, also asking, what is your top focus right now? Like, what is your big burning bush? Like, what's the burning bush right now? And then hearing them explain, what's the big thing they're either trying to wrap their hands around or trying to get a hold of or work through. And then helping them understand how you can align to facilitate whatever it is they're focusing on. That's very powerful. And oftentimes that will make or break, like that will put you right there in the candidacy seat, because if they see you as they make those connections mentally, like their neurons and fire and wire and the right thing, go, oh, okay, I see that connection. then that puts you right there in that candidacy seat. And also, if you're not quite sure if it's a good fit for you, asking their potential boss, well, what would you say is some of the definitive markers of excellence in this role? And hearing what that person's descriptors are will help you understand what type of expectations their boss has. Because you hear things like, well, we just, go all hands on deck. Yes, I love that one. We're all hands on deck to get things done. So you're a sweatshop. Okay.
Warning light.
Yeah, warning, run away now. So those are really interesting. So Carissa, some of these questions can also be taken into moments that matter with decision makers inside the organization as well. Mm-hmm. Understanding how to, because this is the biggest question I get, particularly from my clients, is their biggest challenge oftentimes when it comes to career advancement, getting promoted, etc., is positioning themselves, right? Positioning themselves to where the leaders see them as a resource they want to move up and further. In order to do that, to be quite honest and transparent, we have to give them a business case. You just do. Working hard is not a career advancement strategy.
You can work hard and still be invisible. I mean, my own career story, I so resonate with that. There was a position I was in where I literally felt invisible, even though I was, putting in the long hours and all of that. And my manager went on leave for a while and was expected to come back, but then she decided to just stay and not return to her position. And I was flummoxed when they brought in someone from the outside for that role, when I thought this would be a perfect stepping stone. And that moment really was a wake-up call for me career-wise. Like, if I'm not intentional about making my brand visible, gosh, do I even know what my brand is? Mm-hmm. Then I'm not going to get places. And so It really was a turning point for me. And the two things that made the difference were, one, really getting clear on what my brand was. Mm-hmm. And number two, changing how I approached those internal conversations. And you hit the nail on the head with, you have to be demonstrating value. Brand really comes down to knowing who you are, what you do, and the value that you bring to the organization. Right. And when you have those three buckets clear, then that can frame those conversations, whether it's with your direct boss or even other leaders in the organization. Mm-hmm. You want to be having the conversations of, what are the strategic goals right now and how can I be contributing? But even that is a passive question. Yeah. You can take it a step further and be thinking strategically yourself, where you're suggesting and bringing value of, here's a proposal I have of how we could steer this project, where you're deploying your strengths in a way that showcases, here's what I have to contribute to these projects that are top priority for the organization.
Right. Yeah, it is not bragging to share where you shine the best and brightest, and it's not bragging for you to share your key strengths and your abilities in those moments that matter. I encourage everyone to have touch points with the leaders that you feel like are supporting you, that are in your corner, if you will, and understanding where is the company going, where is that, focus area, what's that roadblock they want to remove, and then being very intentional about helping them understand, just like an interview, the connection between your skill set and expertise and how you can add value to resolving whatever it is that they're looking to focus on. And being very intentional about sharing that, because here's the thing, don't think they're going to assume it. Don't think everybody has your resume in their head. They don't. You need to articulate it. And I would have to say, by and large, women tend to struggle with this a little bit more than men. because I coach high achieving women and even leaders at a very high level, senior VPs and the like, still struggle to articulate that very readily. So being comfortable with that, understanding that you're just sharing. Carissa, what other advice do you have for those people tuning in right now?
Yeah, I mean, we've been hitting on key conversations that are important to have if you want to advance your career. And certainly the conversation you have with your direct boss or manager is significant, but even thinking beyond that in the organization, who can be those champions for you? And sometimes we can kind of minimize or think, oh, would they really want to talk to me? Or we can throw ourselves under the bus unintentionally rather than building these strategic relationships within the organization. And I like to think of it as, talk to your career heroes, whether it's in your organization or even people you follow on LinkedIn that are within your industry, to reach out and have a conversation of, what would you say to me at this point in my career that's going to help me make it to that next level? Who else should I be talking to? And people are honored when someone reaches out to them in that regard, but also it really gives you a strong network to be able to go in multiple directions that way. So think for a moment, even as you're listening to this, who are 2 or 3 people who are your heroes in the industry? Maybe they've written a book, or you heard them on a podcast, or you follow them on LinkedIn. What would it look like just to reach out and have a conversation with them, and how that could expand your network? But there's one conversation that we have yet to touch on that is really important, because all of these conversations we've talked about so far are external facing with your stakeholders, your leaders. But really the most important conversation to be aware of is your conversation with yourself. Because we all have a story that we're telling ourselves about our career. And we don't even realize it. The story is playing. But for some, maybe it's the story of, I've missed the boat, it's too late. Or maybe the story is, I'm not as good as, or we've all got stories. And by taking the time to notice, what is the story I'm telling myself? Which is another powerful question, by the way. That simple question then gives you the ability to then choose, what is the story that I want to be writing here? Instead of, I've missed the boat in my career, perhaps the story is, I'm right on time for the next opportunity, or I'm building my skills that are going to take me to the next level. And we've been talking about conversation here this whole time, because conversation really shapes our reality. We don't think about it. It just is ongoing. But when we recognize what are these conversations that we're telling ourselves, that really gives us the power to shape the trajectory of where things are going. And just being curious again towards, what is the story I'm telling myself, can have a powerful shift in what you're expecting in your career and what you open yourself up to. And a great resource on that is also totally hilarious is a book called Soundtrack by Jon Acuff. He spells his name Jon. And Soundtracks really takes that idea of these stories. We've all got soundtracks that we play over and over. He unpacks, how do you recognize your soundtracks and switch them out for new ones? So if you enjoy audiobooks or written soundtracks, is a really practical resource in rewiring what some of those stories
That's fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's very, very powerful. And I'd love to hear from anybody tuning in now or later. And what is your soundtrack? And is your soundtrack helping you based on your goal? It's fascinating you bring that up, and it's very, very important. As you may know, I'm a neuroscience nerd myself. And what happens is these soundtracks are programs, if you will, those scripts that are playing in our brain. Oftentimes they're not consciously articulated, but they're there. And what they do is they define your actions. And you may literally not be cognizant of an opportunity that's right in front of you because you've told yourself that either you aren't ready or you aren't good enough or whatever, right? These limiting beliefs that keep you caged and not allowing you to access the opportunities that may be literally right in front of you. You can't even see it because your brain, while it's extremely advanced, is also a fantastic filter. And it will filter out anything that does not align with the story that you told yourself. So we want to be aware of those soundtracks, as you mentioned, and those narratives that are going on, those conversations that we're having with ourselves. So thank you for bringing that up, Carissa. That's very, very powerful. And before we wrap up today, and thank you for all of you tuning in now or later, but before we wrap up today, what is some key tips you want to leave people with today around conversations and having empowering conversations?
Yeah, I mean, really, it boils down to becoming aware of your conversations. Often we just see conversation as something that happens or fills space. But as you become intentional about changing your conversations, whether it's changing the soundtrack or changing how are you connecting with that difficult person? Are you responding with empathy or is it reaction? And so by becoming intentional about the conversation, you really create the environment for more opportunity, more creativity, and the advancement that we want comes when we're having the conversations that really allow our brain to see what's possible.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, it allows us to unlock our potential, our full potential. And that's something that I'm definitely big on. So thank you so much for Carissa. That's been a true pleasure having you on the show. And thank you for all of you tuning in now or later. Like I mentioned before, don't be shy. Reach out to us if you have any questions or comments, if you're having a conversation you need to make, or you'd like to make a better conversation. Reach out to either one of us. Now, Carissa, how can they connect with you? So if they have any questions, I know that you have some resources and you also have a workshop coming up, I believe, as well for International Women's Day.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. This conversation truly has been a pleasure on my part, too. It feels like we just hit the tip of the iceberg on some topics. So fun to be able to share it with everyone tuning in now. And you can connect with me in a couple of ways. I'm active on LinkedIn, Carissa Gay. You can search for me there. And I regularly share tips related to communication, leadership, career advancement. So happy to be a resource in that regard. My website is courageousleaderscoaching.com. So you can find me there. And there's some different resources and opportunities to engage. But yeah, a couple of things coming up as far as where I'm presenting. I'm part of the faculty for a Women in Leadership Accelerator, WILA. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see details about that. And then also, I've got a workshop coming up, Conversation Matters. So taking a deeper dive on these things and how can leaders and organizations change their conversations in a way that builds capacity in their team. So happy to be a resource in whatever way is beneficial to you.
Fantastic. So reach out to her on LinkedIn for sure and see what she's up to. Carissa is a fantastic leadership resource as well as Conversations That Matter resource and empowering you in your future and unlocking that potential. Thank you so much again for being a fantastic guest today. Really appreciate you. And I love this conversation that matters. I know we're going to wear it out. We really are. But we're out of time, so I really want to say thank you so much. And thank you for all of you tuning in either now or later, watching the replay. Feel free to reach out, or if you're listening to the podcast when that airs, feel free to reach out to either one of us to empower your conversations. And friends, my deepest wish for you is to keep elevating. Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in on the Career Coffee Chat podcast. It's been a pleasure. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is coacheurban@gmail.com or tweet at coacheurban, Instagram coach.eurban, or reach out to my Facebook group, Elevate Your Career. So I'd love to learn more about you, hear your insights, and what questions you have. You can find out more about me at coacheurban.com. And don't forget, please do reach out on LinkedIn. You can find me at Erin Urban. Until next time, cheers. Here's to caffeinating your career.